Mom told me I shouldn't have been born, right at my graduation dinner. What I did next left everyone at the table speechless. Welcome to Emotional Twist Stories. My name is Madison Harlow, and tonight was supposed to be the happiest night of my life, my college graduation dinner. I had worked for years to reach this moment, dreaming of the pride and joy that would fill the room. But I never expected my own mother, Evelyn Harlow, to turn the evening into a nightmare. As the dinner began, everything seemed normal at first. My father, Thomas, sat quietly, smiling faintly, while my siblings Julia and Marcus exchanged excited glances. The table was set with all the trimmings, fine china, sparkling glasses, and my favorite meal. I had imagined laughter and congratulations, not the storm that was about to hit. Halfway through, Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes cold, and said something that felt like a punch to the chest. Honestly, Madison, you shouldn't have been born. The room fell silent. Forks paused midair. My father's jaw tightened and my siblings froze, unsure how to react. I felt my face burn with a mix of shock, humiliation, and anger. Every word she spoke sliced through the years of effort, love, and sacrifice I had poured into my life. It wasn't just a cruel comment. It was a calculated humiliation, designed to make me doubt everything about myself. But in that instant, something inside me shifted. I refused to let her words define me. I looked her straight in the eyes and forced a calm smile, hiding the storm brewing inside. I decided then and there that I would not be the victim of her bitterness or her manipulations. That night, in that glittering dining room, I planted the first seeds of my revenge. Not with anger, but with careful strategy. I would reclaim my dignity, expose the truth, and make sure she, and everyone watching, understood that cruelty has consequences. The dinner continued, but I wasn't the same Madison who had entered the room. Something stronger, sharper, and unyielding had awakened. The humiliation from that night lingered in my mind, gnawing at me like a constant shadow. Every time I replayed Evelyn's words, "You shouldn't have been born," I felt a mix of rage and disbelief. But more than that, I felt clarity. I realized her cruelty was never random. It was a pattern. She had spent my entire life undermining me, shaping my family's perception of me while maintaining a perfect facade for the outside world. The next few days were unbearable. Family gatherings became tense, with Evelyn subtly mocking my choices and belittling my achievements. At breakfast, she compared my scholarship to my cousin Brandon's hard-earned successes. At dinner, she laughed at minor mistakes I had made during school projects. Every word, every glance, was a calculated reminder that I was less than in her eyes. But beneath the anger, a fire was growing. I began to observe her patterns, noticing how she manipulated my father's opinions, how she twisted conversations to make me seem selfish, and how she even turned my siblings against me in subtle ways. The realization hit me hard. This was not just a mother-daughter conflict. It was years of emotional sabotage, carefully hidden under smiles, celebrations, and family rituals. Instead of breaking me, her cruelty gave me focus. I started making mental notes of every insult, every slight, and every betrayal. I told myself that I wouldn't confront her recklessly. No shouting, no tears. My revenge would be precise, calculated, and undeniable. I would make her see the consequences of her actions in a way she couldn't ignore, exposing the truth of her manipulations without losing my dignity. Every humiliation now became fuel. The fire inside me burned brighter with each passing day. Evelyn thought she was crushing me, but she was unknowingly sharpening the weapon I would use against her. A week after that horrific dinner, curiosity, and a gnawing sense that something was always being hidden from me, led me to my father's study. The door was slightly ajar, and on the shelf, I noticed an old box tucked behind financial files and family albums. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside were letters, journals, and documents that immediately made my heart race. I began reading one piece at a time, and what I discovered sent a chill down my spine. Evelyn had been harboring resentment toward me from the very beginning. In her letters, she wrote about regretting my birth and blaming me for all her lost opportunities and family hardships. She had meticulously documented my mistakes, magnified them in her mind, and used them to manipulate my father and even my siblings. Every hurtful comment, every public humiliation, every sly remark over the years wasn't impulsive. It was intentional. Even more shocking were the financial papers. Evelyn had diverted family funds to projects that favored my siblings and cousin Brandon, while subtly limiting my opportunities. My scholarships, achievements, and sacrifices were constantly minimized, not because they were unremarkable, but because she wanted to maintain control over the narrative of who deserved success. I sat in stunned silence, the letters trembling in my hands. Years of emotional manipulation suddenly made sense. The endless comparisons, the public humiliations, the subtle attempts to turn the family against me. I realized that my mother had spent decades quietly undermining me, painting me as unworthy, all while maintaining her polished, untouchable image. But instead of breaking me, the truth lit a fire inside. I no longer saw myself as a victim. I saw myself as someone who finally had the knowledge and leverage to reclaim my dignity. The humiliation had been intentional, but now I had the roadmap to expose her, and the patience to make her regret every cruel word. My revenge would be deliberate, precise, and unforgettable. After uncovering the hidden letters and documents, I knew I couldn't act recklessly. Revenge wasn't about lashing out. It had to be calculated, flawless, and unforgettable. I spent nights thinking through every detail, examining Evelyn's patterns, her alliances within the family, and the subtle ways she had controlled narratives for years. I realized the key wasn't to embarrass her impulsively. It was to reclaim my dignity while exposing her manipulations in a way that would leave no room for denial. I began documenting everything meticulously. Every cruel word, every financial trick, every subtle attempt to undermine me went into a private journal. I even included dates, times, and witnesses. Anything that could validate my story if I ever needed to present it to the family. Each entry reminded me of the humiliation, the anger, and the betrayal I had endured, but it also strengthened my resolve. Planning my revenge became an exercise in patience and strategy. I knew I couldn't reveal everything at once. Evelyn's arrogance made her believe she was untouchable. I would have to hit her where it hurt most. Her control over the family and her carefully curated image. I envisioned a series of calculated moments, small confrontations, subtle hints, and eventual public revelations that would make her realize the consequences of years of cruelty. Yet even as I plotted, I maintained my composure in everyday life. I smiled at her, nodded politely at her remarks, and attended family events without showing any sign of the storm brewing inside me. To the outside world, I was calm and successful. Only I knew the depths of the betrayal I had uncovered and the meticulous plan forming in my mind. For the first time, I felt empowered. Evelyn had spent decades trying to break me, but I had transformed her cruelty into the blueprint for my own justice. I was ready to strike, and when I did, it would leave no room for denial. A few weeks into my planning, I decided it was time to test the waters. I needed to gauge how much Evelyn truly understood about my awareness of her manipulations, and whether her arrogance still blinded her to the storm I was quietly building. I started attending small family gatherings with a calm, measured presence, allowing myself to observe every reaction, every nuance. At a Sunday brunch, I casually mentioned a long-forgotten incident, one of Evelyn's subtle attempts to manipulate my father into punishing me for something trivial. I phrased it as if I were joking, smiling lightly, letting the comment hang in the air. Evelyn's reaction was almost imperceptible at first. A tightening of her lips, a flicker of unease in her eyes, but I caught it. My heart raced with satisfaction. She realized, even if only subconsciously, that I knew more than I had let on. Over the next few gatherings, I continued these careful provocations. I complimented relatives who had noticed her favoritism toward my cousin Brandon, all while subtly emphasizing my own achievements. I asked questions that hinted at my knowledge of past manipulations without directly accusing her. Each time, Evelyn forced a polite smile, but I could see the cracks forming. The aura of control she had maintained for decades was slipping, and I was holding the keys. Through it all, I kept my composure. I laughed when appropriate, nodded when necessary, and never let my anger show. To anyone else, I appeared calm, even gracious. But beneath the surface, I was methodically dismantling the power she had wielded over the family for years. With each small victory, my confidence grew. Evelyn thought she was untouchable, but the reality was clear. I was no longer the timid daughter she had tried to suppress. I was the storm she had unknowingly invited, and the first ripples of my revenge had already begun. I knew the time had come for my first calculated strike. I organized a surprise celebration for my graduation, but this wasn't going to be a typical family dinner. I carefully curated the guest list: relatives, close family friends, and a few longtime acquaintances who had quietly observed Evelyn's manipulations over the years. I wanted witnesses, people whose opinions mattered and whose presence would make her arrogance crumble. The evening began like any other celebration. Evelyn smiled, unaware of the trap being set. I played my part perfectly, gracious, cheerful, and glowing with success. My father beamed proudly, and my siblings congratulated me politely, still oblivious to the tension building under the surface. As dessert was served, I subtly shifted the conversation. I mentioned accomplishments of family members in a casual, offhand way, carefully highlighting the support and encouragement I had received from others in contrast to Evelyn's constant criticisms. I spoke with warmth about friends who had celebrated my successes genuinely, without ever undermining me. Evelyn's smile began to tighten. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for allies, but I had made sure everyone present knew what she had done. Then, with a calm, measured tone, I recounted a few of the subtle manipulations she had tried over the years. I didn't accuse her outright, yet, but my words were sharp enough to send a ripple of recognition through the room. Whispers filled the air, and the energy shifted. For the first time, Evelyn realized that her carefully maintained control over the family, and her image of perfection was no longer unchallenged. Watching her composure falter was intoxicating, not out of malice, but because it proved that years of hidden cruelty could be confronted with patience and strategy. That night, I wasn't just Madison the daughter. I was Madison the strategist, quietly reclaiming the dignity she had tried to crush. The first strike of my revenge had landed, and it was only the beginning. The next step in my plan was the confrontation I had been carefully preparing for months. I knew Evelyn thrived on control, and to shake her completely, I had to face her head-on. Calmly, confidently, and with undeniable proof. I chose a private moment during a family gathering, one where everyone was present but seated comfortably, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I invited Evelyn to speak with me in the living room under the pretense of a casual chat. She sat across from me, a smirk of superiority on her face, certain she would dominate the conversation as usual. But I had rehearsed every word, every pause, every subtle inflection. I began calmly, recounting years of small, cutting remarks she had made at birthdays, graduations, and casual dinners. Remarks designed to undermine my confidence and isolate me from the family. Her smirk faltered when I mentioned the letters I had found, the meticulous documentation of her resentment and manipulations. I spoke slowly, deliberately, each word landing with precision. How she had twisted my father's perception, subtly turned my siblings against me, and rewarded favoritism while minimizing my accomplishments. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Evelyn's facade cracked. Her usual arrogance faltered, replaced by a flash of fear, guilt, and disbelief. She tried to defend herself, claiming I was exaggerating, but I remained composed, calm, and factual. My siblings and father, drawn by the tension, slowly gathered, witnessing the revelations unfold. Their eyes widened as my words painted a portrait of betrayal they had never fully seen before. For the first time in years, Evelyn faced the consequences of her cruelty in the presence of those she sought to control. I wasn't yelling or pleading. I was exposing truth with quiet strength. The power had shifted. The daughter she had tried to crush was now the one holding the undeniable proof, and the family could see it all. After confronting Evelyn, I knew it wasn't enough to rely solely on my words. She had always been skilled at twisting situations to her advantage, so I needed witnesses. People who could validate the truth of her manipulations and ensure that no one could dismiss my story. I began quietly speaking with relatives and family friends I trusted, sharing carefully selected details about the years of subtle cruelty I had endured. Their reactions were immediate and validating. Many admitted they had long suspected something was wrong, noticed Evelyn's favoritism toward my cousin Brandon, or witnessed her belittling comments. They had kept silent out of fear or loyalty, but now, seeing my composure and the careful evidence I had amassed, they were ready to support me. I didn't push them to take sides yet. I simply let them observe, confirming in their minds what I had already known to be true. The presence of these allies changed the dynamics dramatically. At the next family event, Evelyn's usual dominance was already weakened. She tried to assert control through small jabs and sarcastic remarks, but I responded with calm confidence, occasionally dropping subtle references to her manipulations that she couldn't fully deny. The witnesses were present, their expressions quiet but knowing, and I could see her growing increasingly unsettled. This quiet support amplified my power without me raising my voice. Evelyn realized, perhaps for the first time, that her influence over the family was slipping. The very people she had relied on to maintain her image were now quietly watching, validating the truth she had tried to bury. I felt a strange satisfaction, not from humiliation, but from the fact that truth, patience, and strategy had shifted the balance. For the first time, I could see the cracks in her armor clearly. The daughter she had tried to crush had become the orchestrator of change, and the family could no longer ignore it. The time had finally come for the public revelation. I planned another family gathering, under the guise of a casual brunch to celebrate a minor personal achievement. The room was filled with relatives, close family friends, and neighbors, people who had witnessed Evelyn's carefully hidden favoritism and manipulations over the years. This time, I would make it impossible for her to deny the truth. I began subtly, reminiscing about my accomplishments and expressing gratitude for the support I had received from others in the room. Then, I carefully introduced stories of my mother's past actions, her favoritism toward my cousin Brandon, the subtle belittling of my achievements, and the emotional manipulation she had imposed on the family. I didn't accuse her outright at first. I let the evidence and my calm narration speak for themselves. One by one, I presented the letters and documents I had discovered, the records of her resentment, the deliberate attempts to isolate me, and the financial manipulations that had favored others while restricting my opportunities. I laid them out on the table for everyone to see. Gasps filled the room. Whispers rippled as relatives and friends read what had once been hidden from them. Evelyn's face turned pale, her usual smirk replaced by shock and desperation. For the first time, she couldn't hide behind charm, authority, or control. The truth was laid bare, undeniable, and in front of everyone she had once influenced. People who had once doubted me now nodded in recognition, confirming silently that I had been right all along. Watching her falter in front of the family was powerful, but I felt no joy in humiliation. This wasn't about vengeance for amusement, it was about restoring truth and dignity. The betrayal she had hidden for years was finally exposed, and the family could no longer ignore it. The scales had shifted, and Evelyn was forced to face the consequences of her actions. In the days and weeks after the public revelation, the family dynamic shifted dramatically. Evelyn retreated into herself, no longer able to wield the control she had so carefully maintained for decades. Her arrogance had crumbled under the weight of undeniable proof, and her manipulative tactics no longer carried the same impact. The very people she had counted on to maintain her image now regarded her with wary eyes, realizing the extent of her deceit. My father, Thomas, began to see me in a completely new light. The daughter he had unknowingly allowed to be undermined was now the one demonstrating calm strength, intelligence, and strategy. My siblings, Julia and Marcus, started acknowledging my achievements sincerely, without the usual comparisons or subtle criticisms. Even distant relatives and friends, who had once taken Evelyn's side out of loyalty or habit, now expressed quiet admiration for my courage and composure. I felt a mixture of relief and vindication. The years of humiliation and manipulation hadn't been wasted. They had prepared me for this moment. I had reclaimed my dignity, exposed the betrayal, and restored balance within the family. Evelyn's withdrawal left a void, but it was a necessary one. The toxic influence she had imposed for so long was finally removed, and the family could begin to heal. It was a bittersweet victory. I didn't relish in her isolation or regret, but I understood the lesson clearly. Cruelty and favoritism may hide behind smiles, celebrations, and authority, but truth and patience will always prevail. Karma, subtle but inevitable, had begun to work in my favor. For the first time, I felt free. Not just from her control, but from the constant tension and fear that had haunted my family for years. The daughter she had tried to crush had emerged stronger, respected, and firmly in control of her own story. In the quiet days following Evelyn's fall from control, I finally had a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. The journey had been painful, humbling, and infuriating, but it had also been deeply transformative. I realized that revenge wasn't simply about punishing someone who had wronged you. It was about reclaiming your power, setting boundaries, and restoring dignity that had been stolen. I thought about every word Evelyn had ever said, every subtle attempt to undermine me, and every instance of favoritism she had shown toward my cousin Brandon. For years, I had internalized the shame, wondering if I had done something wrong. But now I understood. The fault had never been mine. Her cruelty was a reflection of her own bitterness and insecurities. Through careful observation, strategic planning, and the courage to expose the truth, I had shifted the balance of power. I had learned that patience could be more effective than confrontation, that knowledge and documentation could be more powerful than anger, and that exposing a betrayal with composure could achieve justice far beyond any momentary victory. Most importantly, I recognized the strength in restraint. I didn't humiliate Evelyn for the sake of cruelty. I allowed truth to speak for itself. By doing so, I reclaimed my place within the family, not as someone to be undermined, but as someone who commanded respect through intelligence, integrity, and resilience. The lessons were clear. Betrayal can cut deep, but it also teaches vigilance. Revenge can be justified, but it is most meaningful when it restores balance rather than inflicts unnecessary harm. And karma, when coupled with strategy and patience, has a way of delivering justice in the most profound and undeniable manner. I finally understood that my journey wasn't just about exposing my mother. It was about discovering my own strength, resilience, and worth. Months passed after Evelyn's exposure, and life slowly began to regain a sense of normalcy, though it was forever changed. Evelyn had retreated from the family's social life, her influence shattered, and her attempts to regain control met with polite indifference. She had finally begun to understand the consequences of years of cruelty. Karma, patient and unyielding, had spoken. I continued to pursue my own life with focus and determination. My achievements, academic and personal, were celebrated genuinely by my family and close friends, free from the shadows of manipulation. Thomas, my father, began to acknowledge the depth of my perseverance, apologizing for the times he had unknowingly sided with Evelyn's narratives. My siblings, Julia and Marcus, gradually embraced a more supportive role, finally seeing me as the strong, capable person I had always been. Yet even in this victory, I didn't feel triumph in her suffering. The lesson of betrayal had taught me something greater. Strength isn't measured by the harm you inflict, but by the dignity you preserve and the integrity you uphold. Evelyn's fall wasn't punishment, it was consequence. The arrogance, cruelty, and favoritism she had wielded for decades finally backfired in the most undeniable way. When Evelyn sought reconciliation, it was too little, too late. I had rebuilt my place in the family, solidified my respect, and reclaimed the narrative that had once been twisted. I realized that karma doesn't require force. It simply unfolds when the truth cannot be denied. Looking back, I saw that every insult, every slight, every humiliation had prepared me for this moment. I had turned betrayal into clarity, pain into strategy, and suffering into strength. I emerged not only vindicated but empowered. Proof that even the deepest wounds can teach resilience, and that justice, when guided by patience and intelligence, always finds its way. Madison Harlow was no longer the girl Evelyn tried to diminish. She was a force, unbroken and unshakable.